Algériens.
Les Algériens.
L'Algérie et
L'Algérie.
Les Algériens.
This can often be heard by both French politicians and media. But nowadays, Algeria is occupying a significant part of France's agenda. The two countries are locked in one of their worst diplomatic crises since Algeria gained its independence in 1962. France is threatening to abandon its side of a 1968 legal migration pact with Algiers. The deal regulates the movement and residency of Algerians in France and has undergone several amendments, the most notable being the 1986 revision, which introduced a visa requirement for Algerian nationals. France now wants to push even stricter immigration rules on Algerians. Paris has even threatened to scrap the deal entirely if Algiers doesn't renegotiate. Algeria sees France's move as arrogant and disrespectful and is refusing to budge. In the most recent incident, Algeria on April 14th expelled 12 French embassy officials in retaliation for the detention of an Algerian consulate employee in Paris. To fully understand this crisis better, we need to go back in history. As a French colony, Algeria's labor history with France goes back to the early 19th century when single Algerian men were brought to France to work. Paris allowed them to work for 1 or 2 years before returning them home and replacing them with new Algerian workers. Paris benefited from cheap labor. Algerians mostly worked blue-collar jobs, including in coal mines, docks, and construction. At the dawn of World War I, France enrolled recruits from its colonized territories to serve in its armies and work in its factories. These included close to 1 million Algerian workers and over 170,000 Algerian soldiers. By the end of the war, the trend continued, with France bringing in more Algerians to rebuild the post-war country. In 1945, a battered Paris was desperate to rebuild after World War II, but it needed workers as it was facing a massive labor shortage. It opened its borders to territories it colonized, like Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. Waves of migrant workers arrived with their families to permanently settle in France during the period known as Les 30 Glorieuses, or Glorious 30, in reference to France's 30-year post-war boom. By the 1950s, North Africans, especially Algerians, became the backbone of France's entire workforce. Known as Shibanis, these North African laborers are responsible for building France's infrastructure, from its roads and railway networks to a majority of its large buildings. A majority of these North African laborers lived in poverty, as France exploited them by underpaying them. According to a 1975 report by renowned Algerian anthropologist Mahfoud bin Noun, Maghrebi workers in France encountered racial and class disparities. 87.2% of Algerians, 81.4% of Moroccans, and 70.3% of Tunisians were stuck in low-paying, unskilled jobs, while the high-paying jobs went to French and European workers. France's policies reinforced this racial hierarchy. Life was not easy for the migrants. They faced racism, discrimination, and prejudice everywhere they went. Their living conditions were squalid too. The French government had crammed them into overcrowded slums where they regularly endured police brutality. In 1966, French official Yves Cheniou estimated that Algerian workers pumped roughly 3.5 billion francs into the economy, which is worth around $10.5 trillion in today's currency. French capitalists raked in 1.5 billion francs a year from this exploited workforce, which is equal to around $4.5 trillion today. 40% of Algerians worked in construction and the rest in agriculture and other sectors. They forged ahead with grueling and often risky tasks like digging tunnels, laying railway lines, and building roads and other infrastructure. These were jobs the French didn't want, instead choosing safer supervisory roles. Despite harsh conditions, workers could not return home, as Algeria's economy was struggling to recover after it won independence from France following the 7-year Algerian War. Most workers chose to stay in France and send money back home to their families to finally buy land, which had not been possible during the French occupation. The war devastated the country, with France's military suppression forcing 2.35 million Algerians into barbed wire camps. France's scorched earth tactics during the war involved razing 8,000 villages to the ground and left farmers with nothing. Algeria's victory in gaining its independence in 1962 dealt a massive blow to France. Algerians became targets of racist stereotypes by French politicians and the media, who linked them to criminal activity. Algeria stepped up for its citizens and engaged with France on a diplomatic level. By 1968, bilateral agreements were signed by both countries to put a proper labor deal in place. And now, in 2025, France is looking to turn its back on Algerians, the same people it exploited and benefited from for decades.